Well, using Romans 10 as your base text is not a good idea in the first place, because it depends what you mean by confessing Jesus as Lord. If you go down to the 14th verse there, doesn't it say, how can they call on him they have not believed in? And how can they believe without a preacher? Let's translate that properly. How can they call on him in whom they haven't believed? And how can they believe without hearing him? Not hearing about him. NIV is dangerously wrong. You have to hear Jesus preaching. That's what the Greek says. Not just hearing about him, that he died for me. That's the trick. Otherwise, you're in danger of getting rid of the teaching, gospel, evangelism of Jesus. That's the one thing you mustn't do. Some of our audience perhaps can come up with a good parable for us. What is it in your life experience where if you leave out step one and you proceed to do step 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., you lost the whole thing. You haven't got off the ground. I suppose, if you're hoping to drive your car without starting the engine, whatever it is, you must define the gospel as Jesus defined it and as Paul also did. So don't use the one in Romans 10 unless you're going to see that the text actually says, and I had this in my translation, that you must hear Jesus. You must hear him preaching, in other words, not just hear about him. That's the trick that we must work against. The Spirit is given to those who obey. You're not going to get the Spirit unless you obey. That's back to the parable of the sower, which I used to say jokingly to our students in the Bible college. You need to preach the parable of the sower 5 times every Sunday. The parable of the sower is Jesus's theology of salvation, which is not once saved, always saved. Some people believe for a while, Jesus said in the parable of the sower, and then they give up. So you've got to keep believing. And salvation in the New Testament is mostly yet in the future. You're going to be saved. So the whole idea of put up your hand and say you confess Jesus, that doesn't get you saved. It gets you started. So you get the Spirit. Then you don't have to, you're praying presumably at that time anyway. But God promises his Spirit to those who obey him. We have God promises the Spirit to those who obey him when it says repent and be baptized and you will receive the gift of the Spirit. It's not so hard. So do you think he's going to give it to those who refuse to be baptized?